over here because of the Zoom. So anyway, I'm Denise Ward. I'm with the Friends of the Aptos Library, and I feel like we all know each other by now. We've all been to, I've seen most of you, if not all of you, at one of the previous events. This is event number 10, and we have one more to go. Thursday at the Steel Bonnet in Scotts Valley is our trivia night. So if you can make it to that, you can show off everything you've learned from this past month and I guess win a prize. So, hey, so anyway, I'm sorry about the technical problems. I have to talk really fast so that they don't happen again. I just want to introduce our presenter tonight, Dixie Dixon. She has been a photographer for over 40 years. She's been the official photographer for several nonprofit organizations, including the Utah Classical Guitar Society, the Carmel Music Society, and the Monterey Cowboy Poetry and Music Festival. She is lucky to have met and has had as mentors several respected icons in the photography world who have contributed greatly to her knowledge of photographic history and technique. She was married to Dorothea Lange's son, Daniel Dixon, from 1994 until his death in 2009. She's currently a member and steering committee member of the Image Makers Fine Art Photography Group and a previous member of the women's photography group, Photo Saga. So we are very happy to have her here, and she will answer questions at the end of the presentation. So if you can save your questions for then, she's happy. Can you all hear me now? Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to thank Gail and for putting this together, and Rowan and Sarah for setting up the sound and the videos and all the stuff we need to run. But tonight I would like to share with you some of the things I know and feel about one of the historically great women photographers whose life and work has had a great impact on present-day photography, Dorothea Lange. Thanks as well to all of you for coming. I know the weather isn't the best outside. I appreciate your interest in Dorothea's life and work. So tonight's presentation will not be a professorial or academic review of Dorothea Lange's history and achievements. You can obtain those from the hour of books by, on, or about Dorothea, not to mention articles, films, and other materials. So instead, I'm going to offer a more intimate personal glimpse of a genius whose son Daniel I happened to be married to for 15 years, from 1994 until his death in July of 2009. This presentation was originally written and presented by Daniel from his perspective. So tonight you'll be hearing about Dorothea's life, and in some cases you'll be listening to the words that Dorothea actually spoke and wrote, each syllable as authentic as the signature you see up there on the screen. I never met Dorothea, but during the time Daniel and I were together, I heard enough about her from him to feel that I really did know her. Although Daniel had a somewhat difficult childhood, having Dorothea as a mother and Maynard Dixon as his father, he revered and respected these two icons very much. There's a documentary by Tom Ropoleski called Child of Giants, which tells this story in detail. It's been aired on PBS and elsewhere and may be purchased through the Thunderbird Foundation in Mount Carmel, Utah. On the door of every dark room she ever had, Dorothea had a quotation written by Sir Francis Bacon over 400 years ago, which became her credo and guided her life. The contemplation of things as they are, without error or confusion, without substitution or imposture, is in itself a nobler thing than a whole harvest of invention. Dorothea was born in Hoboken, New Jersey on May 26, 1895, to Henry and Joanna Newtshorn. Her given name was Dorothy Newtshorn. Her father, a lawyer, left the family at a very early age, and the family never communicated with him again. So she never saw her father again. Dorothea did not describe herself as an artist. As a documentary photographer, she became an observer, a visual historian. Her job was to record, not interpret, the truth. She resisted the impulse to create. That's why the most compelling feature of her work is its integrity. By temperament and instinct, though, an artist is what Dorothea Lange truly was. While growing up in Hoboken, Dorothea's mother knew she was uncommon, that she could see. To her, according to a neighbor, everything is beautiful. She changed her name from Dorothy to Dorothea and picked up the last name from a Lange relative. When Dorothea was in her early 20s, she and a friend left home to go west. She was interested in and practicing to be a photographer. She and her friend made it all the way to California, where they were summarily robbed of what money they had. Dorothea worked in a variety store for a while as the film developer, and one of her customers, a wealthy man, was very impressed with her skills as a photographer and offered to set her up in business as a portrait photographer. She catered to the elite, the cream of the trade, in her words. During that period in all her life, she had many different looks. She coiled her hair, then she cropped it short. She wore exotic jewelry. She smoked when no one else did. Her clothes weren't clothes. They were costumes. Dorothea was crippled by polio when she was 10. She walked with a limp and often wore long skirts and dresses. These covered her lame leg and twisted foot. Dorothea was a wonderful portrait photographer. Her patrons were wealthy and distinguished. Merchant princes, cultured aristocrats, patriarchs, stately matrons, and privileged children. Here's what she had to say about taking a portrait. I seriously tried with every person I photographed to reveal them as closely as I could. A portrait is a lesson on how one person should approach another. You have to wait until certain decisions are made by the subject, what he's going to give the camera, and the photographer, what he's going to take. Because of this, these people trusted her. That's why they seem so much at ease. They're poised, but not posed. She talked to them for a few minutes before she'd take their portraits until they became unafraid to be themselves. She said, no subject can hold anything that's false for very long. It can't be done. Most often her subjects look straight into the camera, secure in their integrity. Not long after Dorothea opened her studio, she met artist Daniel Dixon. She was enticed by the click of his cowboy boots on the floor above and asked someone who it was. They met and sons, Daniel in 1925 and John in 1928. About the time the Great Depression began, Dorothea was looking out the window of her studio at a breadline and decided to walk down in the street and photograph what was happening. White Angel Breadline became one of her most famous photos. She soon began doing less work in her studio and more photographing in the streets. It was also around this time that she and Maynard began farming the boys out, usually in Carmel. It was too expensive for each of them to maintain their respective studios and also a family home. And I remember Daniel telling me that when they were dropped off, he'd watch the taillights as they left and wonder if they were ever coming back. They always came back. However, as the years went by, Dorothea and Maynard grew apart. I knew that this man, while he loved me, didn't share the depths of his life, Dorothea said. Some of Dorothea's early field work was done in a model migrant camp, financed and run by the federal government. And Dorothea began photographing for the Farm Security Administration with Professor Paul Taylor, documenting the plight of the migrant workers. And there she is getting ready to do some stoop labor, to see what it's like. And I notice we still do that today. We have some machines that do some of the work, but there's still a lot of stoop labor. There she is trying it out. Tom Collins was managing one of those government camps. He was a slim, dark, wiry fellow, intensely close with the people. And John Steinbeck somehow encountered him. And Tom Collins is a big figure in the book. Tom Collins is that camp manager in The Grapes of Wrath. That first government assignment was followed by an even more important association. One day on a field trip, standing in a middle of wildflowers, they realized that they loved each other, and she and Paul eventually married and stayed happily married until she died in 19. As much as Dorothea loved Maynard at one time, he didn't share in the vitals. To Dorothea, there weren't any grab shots for Dorothea. Because of the polio, she moved very slowly and deliberately. This sense of patience paid off in the resulting photographs. My great mother is one of these portraits. She asked me no questions and made postures were closer and closer. She seemed to know that my postures might help her, and so she helped me. There was a kind of equality about it. This image has been used over and over in different iterations with different people and nationalities. And here she is, Florence Thompson, many years later with her grown daughters. This image was made into a postage stamp in early 1998. Dorothea said, "We have only one universal language, and that's the human face. The same expressions are understandable all over the world. Its shades of meaning, explosions of emotion, all concentrate on just that one part of the anatomy. Look at the next strange face you see. But really, look at it. Behind those eyes is a whole life, as complicated, as mysterious as your own. If for a fleeting instant you can feel the pressure of that life, you have hailed in passing that unique miracle, the other fellow. But really, look at it. During her career, Dorothea also photographed the Japanese internment. That event was a national dishonor. History has confirmed that the internment of those Americans in bleak, forbidding centers was caused hysteria and greed. Some of her most powerful photographs were themselves probably burned. In any case, they made the authorities. An entire world of negatives mysteriously vanished. But the images that survived nevertheless tell a tragic story. This is what we did. How did it happen? How could we? A few years later, Dorothea worked very closely with Ansel Adams and documented the wartime boomtown of Richmond, California, site of the huge Kaiser shipyards. Her son Daniel worked there, and her brother, Martin Lange. But at the end of World War II, Dorothea's lens went dark. Up until that time, there'd been no illness. 1946, ulcers, doctors. Now and then she recovered enough strength to work, mostly from her own home, her neighbors. The trees in her yard, her grandchildren. That's Daniel's daughter, Leslie, and Gregor, the oldest grandchild. She also had assignments with Life magazine, one Mormon churches in Gunlock, Utah, and another one was in Ireland. Daniel had become an accomplished writer by that time and wrote the accompanying text for those photo essays, both the one for the Utah churches and the one in Ireland. And he became a writer later in his life. So these were for Life magazine, and they went there in 1951. There's Daniel standing by the American Express office. They went to photograph the Irish people, and Dorothea had read a book about Ireland, and she really wanted to go there. And this next shot was taken by me in 2006, but I put that in there because that is Daniel in 2006, and there he was in 1951. So same shop, same storefront. So here's some of the Irish country people. And I remember Dorothea, in one of her writings, said that this girl was like the flight of the wild geese. She just loved the look on her face. I love this one because the sun's shining through her hair. It looks like a halo. This little girl, this was the last photograph that was taken of her before she died of appendicitis. So the family was really thrilled to have this photograph. So while they were there, I just want to do a little summary here that Daniel told me that wasn't in his original presentation. While they were there, they were in County Court at the old Grand Hotel, and Daniel ended up meeting some of the locals and drinking with them pretty much all night. So they stayed at the old Grand Hotel, and he knew that he had to go shooting with his mother the next day because he was doing all of the text. And he didn't want her to know that he'd been up drinking with the locals all night. So 10 minutes before she was to get up, he went upstairs and, freshened himself up and came out of his room just in time to meet his mother. And he thought he'd gotten away with it until they walked down the stairs and these same guys were there and they said, Daniel, come see us again when the humor is on you. Join us again. So he was busted. And I was able to meet some of the people that were still alive in 2006 that were there in 1951. They were much older, and most of them are gone now. But there's a book here called Dorothea Lange's Ireland, written by Jerry Mullins, an Irishman. And in that book is a picture of a little girl who said to Dorothea, "Don't take my picture, photograph my sister. She's much prettier than I am." And Dorothea said, "I like the way you look." So here I am sitting on the couch next to a woman, and Daniel had just given his presentation at the old Grand Hotel, County Clare. And I said, "Are you in the book?" He said, "I am." And he turned to that page. And in this book, I have a snapshot of her, what she looks like today, just so that I stuck inside the book. So that was kind of fun to talk to her. So here's a little more about taking photographs in Dorothea's own words. "I find that it has become instinctive to group photographs. I used to think in terms of single photographs, no more. A photographic statement is what I now reach for. The relationships, progressions, contradictions, positives and negatives. I am just now beginning to understand it." So here's some examples of the groupings with an interesting twist. Unbeknownst to either of them, Dorothea's photos and Maynard's art often took the same track. Who copied whom? Daniel said neither. They just chose the subject at hand and what was going on. Look at these similarities. There's Dorothea's photo and Maynard's art. Dorothea's photo and Maynard's art. It's uncanny how much they're alike. So on her last trip abroad to Asia, it was to be very different. She said to the doctor, "Shall I go?" And he said, "What's the difference whether you die here or there? Go." So go she did. with Paul. And there's Paul sitting in the middle of that group. And I think Dorothea, yeah, Dorothea is on the left there. And Paul in the middle. Pretty much wherever she went, she had a camera. While she was there, she not only photographed everything she saw, she wrote wonderful descriptive letters to those at home. I don't know how many of you know, she was quite a good writer. And actually, so was Maynard. There's a whole book of Maynard's poetry called Rimrock and Sage. If anybody ever sees that, pick it up. It's a fine book. So here is a letter written to Helen, her daughter-in-law. Dear Helen, the next time you go shopping in the co-op, think of me as I thought of you this morning in the Central Market of Manila. This is a market like our 10th Street Market in Oakland or the Crystal Palace in San Francisco. Even I found the heat and the flies and the crowds hard to take at moments, and I kept my eye on the nearest way out, for the people are packed solid in the narrow aisles before the stalls, and you're pushed along with vendors yelling in your ears, and puddles of dirty standing water under your feet where you wade through. But the reason for doing it is the feast for the eyes. All the beautiful fish and strange sea life of the tropics is spread out before you in one section of this carnival. Great baskets of all manner of lobsters, crabs, shrimps, clams, in all sizes and colors, in all manner of things I never saw or dreamed of, and gleaming fish, all kinds, all sizes, laid on banana leaves, and all the strange leaves and herbs where they cook them. Some of the sea life they cook right there under your eyes, in leaves and herbs and wrap in bamboo and eat. Then the crowd suddenly backs away from the middle path and you get jammed against the fish in the stall to make way for two men bearing a big, whole fresh roasted pig strung on a bamboo pole. And then you find a corner only to be surrounded by fresh coconuts, which three fellows crack with great knives and grind the meat. The whole market is festooned by bananas, green ones and orange ones, and red ones, masked with the yellow ones. And when I got into the fruits and vegetables, there my eyes couldn't take in the bewildering variety and beauty of growths and produce, most of which I had never before even dreamed of. This is the tropics, and these dark brown people against all this fantasy of color, and the thin brown hands moving in and around in the buying and selling and rearranging on straw mats and leaves, and basketfuls of mangoes and loquats, and small golden and brilliant red eggplants, all mounted on bamboo poles, the most delicate tiny peppers, and seeds like seashells, and mountains of greens, mountains of them, kind unknown, not one packaged thing, just great baskets, bright pink sweet potatoes and hot syrupy cakes, which they make on braziers right there, and baskets of eggs, dyed all colors like Easter eggs. These are from China. Why colored, I do not know, mostly purple. This is what so far I have enjoyed in Manila. Much darlings, to all my darlings, D. I'll be remembering this market when I push the cart with Lisa baby in it around the... Dorothea became more autocratic. She never raised her voice. She never lost her temper. But she ruled like a Bismarck. And she turned her house into a work of art. Over time, routines became rituals, customs became ceremonies. On holidays, the same patterns were repeated year after year. There were real candles on the Christmas tree. Dorothea wrote, I suppose if some of my children were here discussing their relationship with me, they would be able to think of things that were quite horrifying, dreadful that I did, and that I was unaware of. She dominated everywhere, except behind the camera. There she let her subjects speak for themselves in their own voices, but with family, friends, and associates, she instinctively maneuvered for control. All this changed when the grandchildren came along. They spent much time together at a cabin in Stinson Beach. And she doted on them. That's again Leslie, Daniel's daughter, Dorothea. And Leslie and Dorothea and Gregor, oldest grandchild, with John's son, and Paul. And that's Helen. In later years, as her health became progressively worse, she began to refuse assignments. By then, her into esophageal cancer. She began to narrow the scope of her work. She took photos that were prophecies, more of her grandchildren and children. So Daniel and John, they're there on the top row, and Daniel's first wife is the third row on the left. And then there's all the kids, and Dorothea and Paul are in the middle. That's Diana Taylor. She wrote, I think, Grab a Hunk of Lightning, that some of you may have seen. She was Paul's granddaughter. And she took pictures of the noble oaks. Again, things that were close around her. Around the home on this hill, her home on the hillside. She lived at 1113 Euclid, I think, in Berkeley. Sand by the beach. And she contemplated things as they are. Dorothea wore a distinctive silver bracelet she'd had since 1923, and she'd worn it every her life since then. It was very heavy when she first got it, but the silver had worn away by the time she died in 1965 and didn't weigh nearly as much as it did when it was new. Like the bracelet, in her late 60s, Dorothea's life was also wearing away. She had been invited to do a solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, Steichen, and was looking through her lifetime's worth of photographs from which to choose. Your photograph negatives is your biography, she said. She was dissatisfied again and again while choosing the photographs for her exhibit. Not good enough, Dorothea, not good enough, she repeated to herself often. Dorothea had a passionate belief in the power of photography. The camera is an instrument that teaches people to see without using a camera. In her house, rather than her photographs, she pinned just little snapshots, newspaper clippings, scraps of this and that, seemingly inconsequential but infused with subtle implications. These, not the framed masterpieces that reside in museums, were Dorothea's favorite companions. The truth doesn't have to look important to be important, she said. Her photographs made also almost no attempt to communicate facts, to document events and the environment. They asked rather than answered questions. They express wonder. It's her son John and her first grandchild. And they evoke mystery. Here are the last spontaneous words she recorded. It fits the eye, but fills the eye. There it is. Look at that. Look at that. Just look at that. And then it's gone. It doesn't last long. Dorothea died 58 years ago at the age of 70. Just a few weeks after she put her signature on the exhibition that later opened at the Museum of Modern Art. Her work, I believe, continues to inform, to illuminate, and to inspire. Good. Okay. So do we have any questions?
You. You started by saying she didn't consider herself an artist. But her work is so artistic and so beautiful. And I'm wondering, since you're involved with photography groups, do a lot of photographers have that same thought about their work?
So I think everybody probably heard that, but she's asking why Dorothea didn't consider an artist, herself an artist, and if modern day photographers do. That's a difficult question to answer, I think. Obviously, Dorothea was an artist. She felt more like she was just making a history of the world, and seemed to realize some really were truly artistic. Today's world, if you're asking my opinion, art is considered photography. There's documentary photography, there's fine art photography, a lot of different kind of photography. There's snapshots. How about AI, artificial intelligence? There's a lot of questions there. And doing your any artist, you can create anything you want anywhere. So that's probably not an answerable question. I took most pictures of people to me that are now gone. Miller, who was a photographer. He also did a grant in New York or Chicago, and what a character he was. And Rondell Partridge, the son of Imogen Cunningham, another character. And he and I got to be very good. And I know a lot of you have read Mary, and it tells the story of when she went buying a pomo and she passed it, and then she turned around and went back. Rondell was with her. Rondell was quite a lot younger than Dorothea, and she called him her fancy man because he took her everywhere. came of her own trust. And once Daniel and I, he invited us to dinner, and we got there about 2 o'clock, and it took about 5 hours. And 5 minutes, he couldn't even take a picture. So that was a long time coming. I was really hungry. Next, anybody? Any more questions? Yes. Pardon? In her last years, what kind of camera did I think it was really too big to handle. He used this camera, and I don't know what happened to the Graplex. I have no idea, but that's a question. It'd be interesting to know the answer. Yes.
I saw an exhibit of Dorothea Lange at the museum.
Mhm.
And I think there was one there. I had no idea
There was a Graplex there.
I believe so, yeah, but I don't know this one.
For those who didn't hear, she said she went to an exhibit in Oakland and there was a Graplex that, so we don't know if it was just somebody else's or if it was really Dorothea's. I honestly don't know what happened to that camera. Yes,
Did Daniel talk much about the different places that he lived?
yes. Did Daniel talk about the different places that he lived? I don't think either of those kids had a very easy childhood. Because as explained in the presentation, they, in order to keep their own studios and their art going, they had to farm out the boys. And they sometimes didn't know, if their parents would be coming back. They always did come back. But if you see this documentary, Childhood Giants, they explain a lot about their childhood and what it was like growing up with Maynard and Dorothea. I know that there are in some of the books, Daniel told me about this as well. He said that he went into their bedroom, Maynard and Dorothea's bedroom one day, and they were lying in bed naked. And they said, "We have something to tell you. We're getting a divorce." So he found that rather exciting, and he immediately went out and told all the neighbors. So it wasn't what you call your typical childhood. They all lived with Paul. Paul had children as well, and he had an extra child that his squatter's wife had, and he took her in. And I think she's the one that got that bracelet and ring. And I met her. I was able to meet her and Diana. I've met most of the family, if not all. There's other grandkids and so on and so forth. So Daniel was a renegade. John was much easier to get along with. And Daniel always called himself an irregular, and I guess he was. And telling someone and in just Daniel's line that was so true. So those feel like any artist or somebody that's maybe a little different. They're usually smart and they have their curses to go along with their brilliance. But Daniel kicked that house. A lot of service for about his boss ending there, hoping to kind of straighten him out. But got quite sick. You don't stay really well living on the street. And he went back to Dorothea's house and he knocked on the door and she answered it. And there he was, all skinny and cold, it was raining. And he said, "Can I come in?" And she said, "Just a minute, let me ask Paul." So she went and asked Paul and she came back and she said, "Come on in." Well, he stayed with them for back to health, and then he sat down with her at the table. He was in his early 20s at this point, and he asked her if she had ever been interviewed for an article. And by this time, he had become a fine writer because he'd spent so many years in a library, and he was very smart. He interviewed his own mother. And that very first article that he wrote, he sent to Photo Player, one of the big photographic magazines at the time, and they bought it. And in the meantime, he'd moved to the shipyards or an apartment somewhere, and they paid $500, which in money, Dorothea got the check, and he went and wanted to have this. He offered to split it with her, but she said, "No, you have it." And was a fun writer, and he became advertising word Roberts, Ogley and Mather, building Burnball. He did, and he saw in the flat area, nobody heard that was his. So anyway, here, those that I learned being married to Daniel for so many years, and he did love his mother. He knew she was time with both. So here's a question that came from the Zoom. This isn't with her or her family. I just finished reading Mary Coyne for the second time, and I know that it ended with a letter that was supposedly written. And I'm not sure she ever did write her a letter. I know she wanted to, but Dorothea never made any money off of that photograph. And as he felt that they both thought that it was helping society to know the plight of the migrant farm workers. And yeah, it was printed and reprinted, but as far as I know, money was not made off of that photograph by Dorothea or Florence Thompson or her family. It's just the way it was. Yes.
I understand Dorothea took some pictures of the Japanese internment camp, is that correct?
Yes, I showed a few of those slides.
Can you give us any background on how that came to be? Was that part of her work in the federal agency and so forth?
It was part of her work, sort of, with the Farm Security Administration, but I think it got to be an embarrassment to the government, and they pulled her off of that. She kept doing it after they pulled her off, but a lot of those negatives disappeared. It was an embarrassment. So she thought that the people should know what was going on there. Yes.
There's a interesting photographic exhibit in the BART station in San Bruno. Have you guys ever heard of it? Some photographer who happened to be Japanese went and got some of Dorothea's photographs, I believe from the Smithsonian. And he was the descendant of in the
Wow.
and it was about 100 photos in the BART station.
So for those Zoom people that are still watching, there's 100 of those in the BART stand. San Bruno, some of them may be copies of Dora's Japanese internment photos. This book was by Linda Gordon. She came to our house and interviewed Daniel. And I know one of the questions she asked was migrant mother, all those photographs posed, and Daniel said, no, they were not. But I know that when I saw a copy of the migrant mother in the Oakland Museum, there were some people standing there and said, yes, it says in Linda Gordon's book that those were posed, but Daniel said they weren't. And this is a nice book, although the writing's small for old people like me. But I thought they could have done maybe a little better job on the reprints on the photographs, because the real original photographs were much nicer than these. So I was sad that these didn't have a better reproduction or take up more room or something. So anyway, the book's good though. Are any more questions? Are we out of time? How are we doing? We have till 11:30? Okay.
Who was responsible for the color of the Golden Gate Bridge?
Dorothea Lange. If you guys on Zoom didn't hear that, Dorothea knew the people that were painting, or the people that were in charge of deciding the paint color for the Golden Gate Bridge, and they wanted Dorothea to decide, and they had the primer on, and she looked at it and she said, I like that color, the color that it is just now, keep it that way. And that's why the Golden Gate Bridge was primer color. Well, thank you, everybody.